The sun was dipping below the skyline of Chicago's South Side, painting the cracked asphalt of 63rd Street in hues of orange and gold. The air carried the hum of distant traffic, the chatter of kids playing basketball in a nearby lot, and the faint pulse of a city that never quite slept. But on this stretch of sidewalk, the mood was tense, heavy with the weight of something wrong. A crowd had formed a loose semicircle, their faces a mix of unease and detachment, as a woman knelt on the ground, her arms raised to shield herself from the man towering over her. Fear, apathy, or maybe just the instinct to stay out of it kept them rooted in place, their eyes flickering between the scene and their phones. A few blocks away, Marcus Hayes was hustling down the street, his work boots scuffing against the pavement. In his hands, he clutched a pink bakery box, the kind that held a 6-year-old's birthday dreams, chocolate cake with strawberry frosting, specially ordered for his daughter, Kayla. Marcus was a single dad, a welder who spent his days in the heat of a steel factory, his nights piecing together a life for Kayla that felt whole despite the cracks. His wife, Tanya, had passed 2 years ago, breast cancer, too fast, too final, and the grief still clung to him like rust. But today was about Kayla. Her birthday was sacred, a day to make her smile, to remind her the world could still be good. He'd promised her a cake, a party, and he wasn't about to let her down. As he turned onto 63rd, the scene hit him like a punch. The crowd, the man's raised fist, the woman's muffled cry, it stopped him dead. His first thought was to keep moving. He was late, the babysitter was waiting, and Kayla was probably already bouncing around their apartment, asking when Daddy would be home. But then he saw her face, bruised, tear-streaked, her hands trembling as she tried to protect herself. Something in Marcus broke open, a mix of anger and something deeper, something that reminded him of Tanya's strength, of the way she'd fought until the end. "Hey!" Marcus's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. The man froze, his hand mid-swing, and turned to face him. The crowd shifted, a ripple of whispers spreading. Marcus stepped closer, the cake box still in one hand, his other arm outstretched like a barrier. "You're done. Step back." The man, big, broad-shouldered, with a shaved head and a scowl, laughed, but it was brittle. "This ain't your business, man. Keep walking." He took a step toward Marcus, his knuckles red and raw. The crowd tensed, some backing away, others pulling out phones to record. Marcus's heart was hammering, but he didn't budge. He thought of Kayla, of the time she'd asked why some kids at school were mean. "They're scared or hurting," he'd told her. "But you don't fix hurt by hurting someone else." "I said, step back," Marcus repeated, his voice low but steel hard. He set the cake box down on a nearby bench, careful not to tip it, and squared up. He wasn't a fighter, his hands were calloused from tools, not fists, but he stood tall, his brown eyes locked on the man's. The woman on the ground scrambled to her feet, her breath coming in gasps. "Please," she whispered, her voice raw. "I just want to go." Her hair was tangled, her lips swollen, but there was a fire in her eyes, a refusal to break completely. The man lunged toward her again, but Marcus was faster. He stepped between them, his body a shield. "You touch her again, and we got a problem," he said, his voice calm but unyielding. The man hesitated, his fists twitching. The crowd was fully watching now, a few voices muttering, "Call the cops." Maybe it was the weight of their stares, or maybe it was Marcus's quiet conviction, but the man cursed, spat on the ground, and shoved his way through the crowd, disappearing into an alley. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the woman's shaky breaths. Marcus knelt beside her, his voice softening. "You okay? You're safe now." Her name was Elena Martinez, a 34-year-old ER nurse who worked at St. Bernard's Hospital. She told him this later, sitting in a diner a few blocks away, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug. Her ex, the man from the street, had been stalking her for months, showing up at her job, leaving voicemails, escalating until today, when he'd cornered her after her shift. "I tried to fight back," she said, her voice low. But no one helped. They just watched. Marcus didn't know what to say. He wasn't a hero, just a guy who couldn't walk away. He offered to take her to the police, but she shook her head. "I just need to get home," she said, her eyes distant. So Marcus called an Uber, paid with the cash he'd been saving for Kayla's birthday balloons, and made sure she got in safely. Before she left, she looked at him, her gaze steady despite the tears. "Why'd you stop?" she asked. Marcus shrugged, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Couldn't keep walking. Not after seeing you." When he got home, Kayla was waiting, her braids bouncing as she ran to him. The cake was a little dented, but her squeal when she saw the strawberry frosting made it worth it. That night, as they cut slices and sang off-key, Marcus kept thinking about Elena, her trembling hands, her quiet strength. He wondered if she'd be okay, if she'd find a way to feel safe again. The weeks that followed were a blur of routine, factory shifts, school pickups, bedtime stories about princesses and dragons. But something had changed in Marcus. He started noticing the small things, the old man at the bus stop struggling with his bags, the teenager who lingered at the park, looking lost. He began helping where he could, carrying the bags, tossing a football with the kid. Each act felt like defiance against the indifference of that day on 63 RD Street. One Saturday, as he was leaving the hardware store, he saw her. Elena stood across the street, a scarf around her neck, her face healed but still carrying a shadow of that day. She crossed over, a tentative smile on her face. "I looked you up," she said, almost sheepish. "Heard you work at the factory near my hospital." Marcus laughed, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You didn't have to do that," he said, but he was glad she had. They talked, the conversation easy despite the weight of their first meeting. She'd filed a restraining order, started counseling, moved to a new apartment. "That day," she said, "when you stepped in, it made me believe I could start over." Before she left, she handed him a small bag. "For Kayla," she said. Inside was a coloring book and a set of glitter pens, Kayla's latest obsession. Marcus tried to protest, but Elena shook her head. "You gave me more than you know. Let me do this." Over the next few months, Marcus and Elena became friends. She'd stop by the factory sometimes, bringing coffee or a story about a patient who'd made her laugh. He'd tell her about Kayla's latest antics, how she'd redecorated their couch with glitter. They were careful with each other, both carrying their own scars, his from loss, hers from fear. But there was a warmth between them, a shared understanding that grew into something neither had planned. One evening, as they sat on the steps of Marcus's apartment building, watching Kayla chase fireflies in the courtyard, Elena turned to him. "You saved me that day," she said softly. Not just from him, but from thinking the world didn't care. Marcus looked at her, the fireflies casting flecks of light across her face. "You did the same for me," he said. He didn't explain, but he didn't need to. Elena had reminded him that he could still make a difference, that his choices mattered, that he wasn't just a man defined by his grief. Their story wasn't a Hollywood romance. There were no grand gestures, no sweeping confessions. But there was kindness, Marcus's courage on 63rd Street, Elena's resolve to rebuild, the small ways they supported each other. There was hope in Kayla's laughter, in the way she'd started calling Elena Miss E. And there was love, the kind that grows quietly, built on trust and shared healing. Years later, when Kayla was old enough to understand, Marcus told her about that day, not to make himself a hero, but to teach her what courage looks like. "One moment can change everything," he said. "For them, and for you." As he glanced at Elena, helping Kayla with a science project at the kitchen table, he knew it was true. He'd saved her once, but she'd saved him too. By showing him that even in a city that could be cold, there was still room for compassion, for hope, for a new kind of family.